rewrite it. So there was a problem with that. Olivier, I don't ever say his last name because I don't know how to pronounce it. He's French and I don't want to murder it. So Olivier had essentially retired from the project at that point. Not in the terms of, you know, he was 65 years old and in the old folks home, but he had a wife and kids and a job, and he didn't have the time to devote to the product. And so there was another developer that had named Volker who had stepped up and was doing a lot of the day-to-day development on it. And he also realized, hey, you know, in order the users want stuff, we can't give it to them. We're going to have to rewrite this. He was a Linux guy, and he worked on Linux for his day job. I shouldn't say was, he is. And he basically said, if this is going to get rewritten, it's going to be a pretty big effort, and that's going to mean I'm going to do it. And everybody, yeah. And he said, if I'm going to rewrite it, I'm going to rewrite it in Linux, because that's what I'm familiar with, that's what I use, and that's, you know, the way things are going to go. And Olivier didn't particularly like that a whole lot, but he's like, hey, I'm out, I'm retired. You know, I don't do. Okay, fine, do whatever you want. You know, you're willing to sink time and resources into this. You get to choose what you're going to do. Fine. Okay. And so that's kind of where things were headed. That announcement was made, and the community, their reaction was somewhat mixed. Some of the people in the community were like, finally, FreeNAS is moving to the one true platform. You know, we can rejoice, right? There was some of that. There is, right? You know, why would you use anything but Linux? Is very popular. It's very popular in the industry. It's very popular out in the community. One of the problems was ZFS. Linux doesn't have a native ZFS implementation. You know, whatever you download from kernel.org doesn't have ZFS. And a lot of people had started moving their big storage to ZFS. And they were like, well, you know, what are we going to do? You know, you mean we're going to back up all of our data and reformat our system and reinstall? I mean, they were, where would I back it up to? You know, so that was a problem. Some of the problem was some of the FreeNAS users are the opposite of Linux users. They're BSD users, and quite frankly, there's some ew, why would I use Linux? You know, that's a horrible operating system. There's BSD zealots just like there's Linux zealots, and then there was the issue of the GPL. FreeNAS has, you know, some commercial following to some degree, and there were concerns about what are we going to do about licensing and what are we going to do about, you know. So there was a lot of churn in the community. But at the end of the day, nobody was willing to step forward and say, no, we will take care of this. We will keep FreeNAS, FreeBSD. And so they were unhappy about it. People were grumbling, but at a certain point, you know, grumbling doesn't mean a whole lot compared to lines of code. And so that's the way things were going to go. And then it so happened that Matt, who's sitting back there, so we can point him out, he knows Olivier and has offered to help with FreeNAS over the years. And Olivier's always, no, we're fine. And this time, they weren't quite so fine. And so this time, he said, you know, before we would go down this road, let me talk to Volker. But we came to an agreement where Volker would start a new project because he was interested in creating a Linux-based NAS. And since he was going to do a rewrite anyways, he just said, hey, I would just like to go do my own thing and go rewrite a NAS. And so he started a project called the Open Media Vault, which is a Linux-based NAS, and started doing his thing. And Olivier turned over the project, FreeNAS, to iXsystems, and we started on a project to do the things that needed to be done to make it viable for the users to continue using it based on FreeBSD. So that happened earlier this year. And we've been working on it in various degrees ever since. So when we took a look at what do we want FreeNAS to be, we said, you know, what do we want? What do we want? We said very clearly we want it based on FreeBSD 8. Gets us a new ZFS. It's, FreeBSD 7 it's slowly dying out. We're going to do the last release of FreeBSD 7 in January, hopefully, and then development will pretty much halt on it, except for bug fixes and stuff like that. So we wanted to get caught up with the current state of the world. We wanted dynamic package support. We wanted to be able to say, oh, you've installed the cups printing module, and there it is in your GUI, without any further interaction. Oh, you've installed the OpenVPN VPN package. Oh, there it is in your GUI, without any further configuration. We wanted to keep using FreeBSD as the base. That's sort of a given. And we wanted to keep the features that the current FreeNAS has. We didn't want to lose functionality that, so that upgrading wouldn't cost, oh, well, now this doesn't, it doesn't have this, it doesn't have that. Because there's so many users that, while FreeNAS has a wide variety of features, and certainly some of them are more popular than others, with the number of users, everything becomes used. You go, well, IPv6 support isn't that important, except for the 40,000 users in China. They think it's really, really important because it's the only way they can connect to the network. And whatever feature you pick, there's a significant segment of people that are using it. So those were our goals. So we have some people who are fairly experienced at FreeBSD, basing products on FreeBSD, and fairly important to the FreeBSD community. And so we looked at the project and we said, can we base this on FreeBSD? And the answer is, of course, yes, we can. We had this little matter of writing a GUI for it. It turns out that's not so little. After all, it's actually been quite a project. And in fact, I think it was kind of I don't know if it was a surprise to us, but it quickly became apparent that was the biggest part of this project, was rewriting the GUI. So that's been an interesting thing. And then iXsystems happens to fund the development of a project called PCBSD, which is an attempt to make FreeBSD usable for a desktop system. And the packaging system in PCBSD is somewhat conducive to what FreeNAS needs anyways. And so we were looking at modifying the PBI concept that PCBSD uses for its packages and make a FreeNAS PBI system such that it has the additional hooks in it to modify the GUI dynamically. So you can install essentially FreeNAS PBIs and then get your GUI to show up. Oh, you've installed the, okay, we'll show you the cups printer tab because you've installed that. Whereas if you haven't installed it, it doesn't even bother displaying it. So those were some of the goals that we've had. It's a project we've been working on, not necessarily consistently for about 9 months now, but I would say we've had a good solid 5 or 6 months into it. And it's been really surprising to us how much can be done by a community in a course of 5 years. And you go, well, commercial development, we have people that just sit here and work on this every day for 8 hours a day and plug away at it. And then you go, yeah, and those, several hundred people that do patches every other weekend or something like that, well, they've done a lot. And so we're finally getting to the point, we've done some alpha releases of FreeNAS that are technology previews of it. And we're getting to the point, we just called off a beta because we weren't quite satisfied with the quality of it. But we're getting to the point of doing a beta release, and we're looking at doing the real release by the end of the year. And we're pretty excited about that. Once we get that done, we intend to push it back into the community. And right now we're doing development in sort of a closed, inner circle sort of way, where we're syncing our SVN repo with the FreeNAS project SVN repo. So a lot of times the FreeNAS repo will lag behind what we've actually got going on until we sync with it again, because we want to make sure that we're not doing anything. Well, for one thing, we had an issue where we committed some stuff to our SVN repo that we didn't own the copyright to and that didn't have the proper licensing, and so we had to back it out. And we don't want to push that stuff out to the public repo. So once we get to a point where we can fully sync to the public repo and everything is cleaned up, we have release, we'll sync up and start using that for our full development tree and get the community back in. Right now it's been such a focused effort that it's almost more work to sync somebody up with what we're trying to do than it is to take their contributions. We've gotten some patches, but a lot of times it's just, yeah, you don't really know what we talked about yesterday, and this just isn't going to work. So we're getting to the point where we're going to be able to start doing that fairly quickly. We have there are some issues with ZFS and FreeBSD 8, of course. The first one is that it's significantly lagging behind. It's at version 14. It will be in the FreeBSD 8.1 version of FreeNAS that we release, and I think 28 is the current release of ZFS right now. I think so, or 24. And so we're encountering some issues with ZFS support that we're not sure, has that been fixed upstream already? Do we need to devote resources to fixing that? For small installations of ZFS, for small file systems, we're sort of, there's no ZFS FSIC utility whatsoever. And so if you lose the journal, which we've actually had happen to us, there's no way to recover your ZFS file system at this point. And we're not sure if that issue has been fixed upstream. If that's less of an issue, we would really like to, for small installations, if you're putting ZFS on a 2 terabyte or 4 terabyte or 1 terabyte file system, we would love to have that sort of utility because, in those sorts of sizes, especially for a home user or a small commercial user or something like that, running an FSIC is a lot better alternative than recreating the file system and restoring it from backups. Obviously, for bigger installations, if you're running ZFS on your 300 terabyte file server, you're not going to FSIC it even if you could, and so that's not so much of an issue. But at this point, especially with the target of FreeNAS, we're not seeing a whole lot of that. In fact, I don't know of anybody that's using FreeNAS on something that's significantly over 10 or 12 terabytes of storage. So they may be out there, but if they are, that's the beauty of these kind of things, is you don't know about them. So the other thing that we're looking at is how do you integrate high availability into this, and is that a direction that the project wants to go? Currently FreeNAS is a standalone thing, standalone storage, and so there's no failover, no redundancy between FreeNAS instances. Where should we go with that? Another thing that we've been working on trying to get integrated that the current FreeNAS doesn't have is a GUI for managing RAID controllers. Its target has been primarily home users and stuff like that traditionally haven't been using hardware RAID. They've traditionally been using software RAID, or they've been having single disk scenarios, but hardware RAID controllers are getting really cheap now, and those are starting to pop up in home users' boxes, and they go, well, I have an LSI 9200, I only paid $300 for it, but there's no utilities to manage it. I have to go into the BIOS when I boot the thing to create the RAID array, and then FreeNAS sees it, and but if a drive fails out, there's no way for it to notify me. I don't even know. If I don't see the blinking light on the drive or hear the beeping, my RAID array is degraded and I don't even know. So we've been working on integrating some of the GUIs for some of these tools. One of the fun parts of that is that every single RAID controller has its own API, its own GUI, its own set of management utilities, and one of the things that we've contemplated about doing that probably RAID controller people don't like at all is, what if there's a uniform API for accessing RAID controllers? And of course that would be a horrible idea for them because, well, that's what they do, is lock people into their proprietary solutions, but it would be a great idea for everybody else because then you don't have to worry about, oh, it's an Eureka RAID card, that's totally different than that LSI RAID card and totally different. So those are some of the things that have been on our minds.